In the winter of 1853, when the Colorado Territory was still a harsh frontier, where law existed only in the minds of those brave enough to enforce it, a young woman named Rebecca Lewis vanished from a trading post near what would later become Denver. Her disappearance would remain a mystery for over a century, until a collection of letters discovered in 1867 revealed a story so disturbing that local authorities chose to bury it rather than pursue justice. The letters, found in a deteriorating leather satchel hidden beneath the floorboards of an abandoned cabin in Jefferson County, told the story of a promise of gold that became a descent into human trafficking along the treacherous mountain passes of the Colorado Territory. What makes this case particularly haunting is not just the crime itself, but the methodical way it was planned and executed by men who understood exactly how the lawless frontier could swallow a person without a trace. Rebecca Lewis had arrived in the Colorado Territory in the autumn of 1852 with a wagon train from Missouri. According to the passenger manifest discovered in the Jefferson County Historical Society archives in 1962, she was listed as 22 years old, unmarried, and traveling with her deceased brother's family. The manifest, written in faded ink on yellowed paper, notes that she possessed basic literacy and sewing skills and was seeking employment in the growing settlements. Contemporary accounts from other wagon train passengers, recorded in a diary kept by wagon master Thomas Whitmore, describe Rebecca as a quiet woman with dark hair who kept mostly to herself during the journey. Whitmore's diary, donated to the Colorado State Historical Society in 1958, contains several brief mentions of Rebecca, noting that she was well-mannered but seemed to carry some burden of sadness, and that she asked many questions about employment opportunities for women in the territory. What drew Rebecca Lewis to Colorado was the same thing that drew thousands of others: the promise of gold and a fresh start. The Pikes Peak gold rush was in its infancy, but word had already spread east about fortunes waiting to be claimed in the Rocky Mountains. For a young woman with limited options in the restrictive society of 1852, Missouri, Colorado represented freedom and possibility. She found lodging at McKinney's Trading Post, a rough establishment located along the South Platte River, approximately 15 miles southeast of what would become Denver. The trading post served as a way station for prospectors, traders, and travelers moving between the settlements and the mining camps in the mountains. According to the trading post's ledger, discovered in 1964 during the demolition of the original building, Rebecca paid for her room with needlework and mending services for the establishment's patrons. McKinney's notes indicate that she was reliable and skilled with needle and thread, and that she asked frequent questions about mining opportunities and the prospects for independent prospectors in the region. The last entry regarding Rebecca is dated February 14, 1853, noting payment for mending of winter coats for mining party. It was at McKinney's Trading Post that Rebecca Lewis first encountered Charles Evans, a man who would later be described by witnesses as charming, well-dressed, and possessed of an unusual knowledge of the mining territories. The ledger entries, written in the careful hand of proprietor James McKinney, show that Rebecca lived frugally and saved every coin she earned. Evans had arrived at the trading post in early February, claiming to represent a group of investors from St. Louis who were seeking reliable partners for mining operations in the mountains near Clear Creek. Contemporary descriptions of Evans, found in letters written by other patrons of the trading post, paint a picture of a man in his 30s with blonde hair and blue eyes, always dressed in a fine wool coat, despite the frontier setting. One letter, written by prospector William Hartley to his wife in Illinois, describes Evans as a gentleman who speaks of gold with the certainty of a man who has seen it flowing like water from the mountainside. Evans appeared to take a particular interest in Rebecca Lewis, engaging her in conversations about her plans and aspirations. According to witness testimony recorded in a statement given by Trading Post worker Samuel Cooper in 1867, Evans told Rebecca that his investors were specifically looking for trustworthy individuals with moral character to help establish a legitimate mining operation that would be different from the rough camps that attracted only gamblers and fortune hunters. Cooper's statement, discovered among the personal papers of Jefferson County Sheriff Morton Bradley, indicates that Evans painted an elaborate picture of a well-organized mining settlement where respectable women could find both employment and protection while participating in the wealth being extracted from the territory. Evans claimed that his investors had secured claims along Clear Creek that were proving so profitable they needed additional partners to help manage the operation. The promise Evans made to Rebecca Lewis was carefully calculated. According to Cooper's testimony, Evans told her that women partners in the mining operation would receive a full share of profits equal to any man, and that the settlement included proper housing, regular meals, and protection from the lawless elements that plagued other mining camps. For a young woman with limited options in the frontier territory, it must have seemed like an answer to her prayers. Rebecca's reaction to Evans's proposal, as described by Cooper and other witnesses, was initially cautious. She asked detailed questions about the mining operation, the other partners, and the specific location of the claims. Evans provided answers that seemed reasonable and well-informed, speaking knowledgeably about mining techniques, claim laws, and the geography of the Clear Creek area. In her final letter to her sister-in-law in Missouri, dated February 20th, 1853, and discovered among the papers in the leather satchel, Rebecca wrote that she had met a gentleman representing legitimate business interests, who has offered me an opportunity to participate in a mining venture that could secure my independence. The letter, written in Rebecca's careful handwriting on paper bearing the letterhead of McKinney's Trading Post, reveals her excitement about the opportunity, but also hints at underlying concerns. What convinced Rebecca to trust Charles Evans was not just his promises, but his apparent respectability and knowledge. She wrote, "While I remain cautious about trusting anyone too quickly in this wild country, Mr. Evans has provided me with references and documentation that appear genuine. He speaks of the mining operation with such specific knowledge that I believe he has seen it with his own eyes." Rebecca's letter also mentions that Evans had shown her maps of the mining claims and geological surveys that demonstrate the richness of the deposits. These documents, which Evans claimed were prepared by qualified surveyors working for the St. Louis investors, gave Rebecca confidence that the opportunity was legitimate. On February 22nd, 1853, Rebecca Lewis left McKinney's Trading Post with Charles Evans, carrying her few possessions in a small traveling bag. According to the Trading Post ledger, she settled her account in full and left no forwarding address. James McKinney noted in the ledger that she appeared excited but nervous, and that Evans helped her load her belongings into a well-maintained wagon drawn by 2 horses. Samuel Cooper's testimony indicates that Evans told Rebecca they would travel north toward the Clear Creek mining district, a journey that should have taken no more than 2 days. Evans claimed they would stop at several way stations where Rebecca could meet other partners in the mining operation and see some of the preliminary work that had been done on the claims. The route Evans described to Rebecca was plausible. Clear Creek was indeed becoming a center of mining activity, and there were established trails leading from the South Platte River Valley into the mountains. What Rebecca did not know was that Evans had no intention of taking her to any legitimate mining operation. The last confirmed sighting of Rebecca Lewis was at Rolston Creek, approximately 10 miles northwest of McKinney's Trading Post, where a fur trapper named Marcus Webb encountered the wagon on the afternoon of February 22nd. Webb's account, recorded in a statement given to territorial authorities in 1867, describes seeing a wagon with a man and woman stopped beside the creek. Webb testified that the woman appeared to be Rebecca Lewis, matching the description that had been circulated when she was reported missing. He noted that she seemed quiet and perhaps tired from travel, but did not appear to be in distress. The man, who Webb identified as Charles Evans from descriptions provided by witnesses, was tending to the horses and appeared to be preparing to continue the journey. What makes Webb's testimony particularly significant is his observation that Evans seemed to be consulting a map or document and pointing toward the mountains in a northwesterly direction. This detail suggests that Evans was still maintaining the pretense of traveling toward the Clear Creek mining district, at least while there were potential witnesses present. Webb also noted that the wagon contained more supplies than would be typical for a short journey to nearby mining claims. This observation, recorded in his formal statement, included several days' worth of provisions, extra blankets, and what appeared to be rope and other equipment that seemed excessive for a simple business trip. After leaving the Ralston Creek area, Rebecca Lewis and Charles Evans disappeared completely. No further confirmed sightings were recorded by any of the trading posts, way stations, or settlements in the region. It was as if the wagon and its occupants had simply vanished into the vast wilderness of the Colorado Territory. When Rebecca failed to arrive at any of the mining camps in the Clear Creek district, and when no one in the legitimate mining community had any knowledge of Charles Evans or his supposed investors from St. Louis, James McKinney began to suspect that something was wrong. However, his initial inquiries yielded no results, and territorial authorities had limited resources to investigate the disappearance of a single individual in such a vast and lawless region. The first attempt to investigate Rebecca's disappearance was hampered by the lack of reliable communication between settlements and the limited law enforcement presence in the territory. Territorial Marshal Robert Cameron, based in Denver, received notice of Rebecca's disappearance in early March 1853, but noted in his official log that without specific evidence of wrongdoing or knowledge of the intended destination, pursuit would be impractical given the vast area involved. Cameron's log, discovered in the Colorado State Archives in 1961, reveals the challenges faced by law enforcement in the frontier territory. He noted that individuals frequently change plans without notice, and that the mining camps attract many people seeking to escape their past or avoid obligations elsewhere. Without clear evidence of foul play, Rebecca's disappearance was treated as a missing person case with limited priority. Meanwhile, the trading post community along the South Platte River began to develop theories about what might have happened to Rebecca Lewis. Some believed she had simply changed her mind about the mining venture and traveled elsewhere. Others suspected that she had been deceived, but hoped she had discovered the deception before any harm came to her. James McKinney, however, became increasingly convinced that Rebecca had been deliberately deceived. In a letter to Territorial Marshal Cameron dated March 15, 1853, McKinney wrote that Charles Evans's story contained inconsistencies that became more apparent upon reflection. McKinney noted that Evans had paid for his lodging with coins that appeared to be of recent mintage, despite claiming to have been traveling in the mining regions for several months. McKinney's letter also mentioned that Evans had seemed unusually interested in the personal circumstances of female travelers and workers at the trading post. This observation, combined with Evans' apparent knowledge of Rebecca's limited options and vulnerable situation, suggested to McKinney that the encounter had not been as casual as it appeared. The investigation into Rebecca's disappearance might have ended there, with her case joining the countless unsolved mysteries of the frontier, if not for a discovery made 14 years later. In 1867, a homesteader named David Thornton was clearing land for a cabin in Jefferson County when he discovered the remains of an old structure hidden in a grove of pine trees. Thornton's discovery, documented in a report filed with Jefferson County authorities, included the foundation stones of what appeared to be a small cabin and several personal items that had been left behind. Among these items was the leather satchel containing the letters that would finally reveal the truth about Rebecca Lewis's fate. The satchel, which had been protected from the elements by its location beneath the cabin's floorboards, contained not only Rebecca's correspondence, but also documents belonging to Charles Evans and other individuals involved in what appeared to be an organized criminal operation. The letters painted a picture of systematic deception and human trafficking that operated along the frontier trails of the Colorado Territory. The most significant document in the collection was a letter written by Charles Evans to an associate named William Morrison, dated March 1st, 1853. In this letter, Evans wrote about the successful acquisition of a new asset and provided instructions for transport to the mountain operation as previously arranged. The letter made it clear that Rebecca Lewis had been deliberately targeted and that her disappearance was part of a larger criminal enterprise. Instead, the letter referenced clients in the mountain camps who are willing to pay premium rates for specific types of companionship, and described Rebecca as exactly the type of asset that commands top price due to her respectability and appearance. Deal. The letter also contained logistical details about the criminal operation, including references to established routes through the mountain passes and reliable contacts at remote locations who can provide temporary housing and security. Evans wrote about delivery schedules and payment arrangements that made it clear the operation was well organized and had been functioning for some time. Evans' letter to Morrison revealed that the mining operation he had described to Rebecca was entirely fictitious. Perhaps most disturbing was Evans' casual tone when describing Rebecca Lewis herself. He referred to her as the recent acquisition from the trading post, and noted that she was completely unaware of the true nature of the arrangement until departure from the established routes. Evans seemed to take particular satisfaction in the thoroughness of his deception, writing that Rebecca had expressed gratitude for the opportunity, even as she was being transported to her fate. The letter also revealed that Evans was not working alone. References to Morrison and other associates made it clear that the operation involved multiple individuals with specific roles and responsibilities. Evans wrote about procurement specialists working the trading posts and settlements, and transport coordinators familiar with the mountain routes and safe houses. Morrison's role, as described in Evans's letter, appeared to be managing the mountain operation, where victims were ultimately taken. Evans wrote about Morrison's reliable network of clients and his ability to maintain security and discretion at the final destination points. The letter suggested that Morrison operated from a base somewhere in the more remote mountain regions, where territorial authority was virtually non-existent. Additional letters in the satchel revealed the scope and duration of the criminal enterprise. A letter from Morrison to Evans, dated January 15, 1853, discussed the success of the previous year's operations and expressed optimism about expanding capacity to meet increasing demand from the mining camps. Morrison wrote about 12 successful transactions in 1852 and projected significant growth potential for the coming year. Morrison's correspondence also provided insights into the victims of the operation. He wrote about assets acquired from various sources, including trading posts, wagon trains, and isolated settlements, and noted that young women traveling alone or with limited protection were particularly targeted. Morrison seemed to maintain detailed records of the operation, writing about asset characteristics, acquisition costs, and final disposition, as if he were managing a legitimate business. The letters also revealed the cruel efficiency of the operation's methods. Evans and Morrison had developed a systematic approach to identifying, targeting, and acquiring victims. They focused on locations where vulnerable women were likely to be found and used carefully crafted deceptions that played on their victims' hopes and desperation for better circumstances. One particularly disturbing letter from Evans to Morrison, dated December 10, 1852, outlined their selection criteria in detail. Evans wrote that ideal targets were women between 18 and 25 years of age, traveling without male protection, possessing minimal resources, and demonstrating intelligence and respectability. Nay, he noted that such women were most likely to believe stories of legitimate employment opportunities and least likely to be immediately missed if they disappeared. The letters also described the routes used to transport victims from the acquisition points to the mountain operation. These routes deliberately avoided established settlements and law enforcement presence, using remote trails and temporary camps to move victims through the wilderness. Evans wrote about tested pathways that minimize exposure to territorial authorities and reliable water sources and shelter points for extended transport periods. What became clear from the correspondence was that Rebecca Lewis had been specifically targeted and studied before Evans approached her. A letter from Evans to Morrison dated February 5, 1853, mentioned the prospect at McKinney's trading post who matches all desired characteristics. Evans had apparently observed Rebecca for over a week before making contact, studying her routines, financial situation, and social connections. Evans's February 5th letter also revealed that the mining operation story had been developed specifically for Rebecca. He wrote about tailoring the deception to her apparent intelligence and interest in business opportunities, and noted that her lack of family connections in the territory made her an ideal target. Evans seemed to take professional pride in his ability to craft convincing narratives for different victims. The correspondence also provided clues about what happened to Rebecca Lewis after she left McKinney's trading post with Charles Evans. A letter from Morrison to Evans, dated March 10, 1853, referenced the recent arrival from the trading post and confirmed successful delivery despite weather complications during transport. Morrison wrote that the victim had adapted to circumstances as expected, but provided no specific details about her condition or treatment. Morrison's March 10th letter also mentioned placement with the Thompson Group operating north of Clear Creek, and noted that compensation has been received as agreed. This reference to the Thompson Group suggested that the criminal organization included additional cells or associates operating in different regions of the territory. The letters indicate that victims were sometimes moved multiple times after their initial capture, presumably to prevent escape attempts and to serve different clients in the criminal network. Morrison wrote about rotation schedules and transfer protocols that suggest a sophisticated operation designed to maximize profit while minimizing risk of detection or rescue. The letter, which appeared to be unfinished and was found loose among the other papers, began, "My dear sister, if anyone should find this letter, know that I was deceived by Charles Evans and taken against my will to a place where terrible things happen to women who have no one to protect them." Rebecca's letter fragment, written in increasingly shaky handwriting, described being taken to a remote cabin where other women are held, and mentioned men who come and go as they please, while we are kept locked in rooms with barred windows. She wrote about being told that escape is impossible due to the wilderness location and the presence of armed guards who have been instructed to prevent any departures. The letter also revealed Rebecca's growing understanding of her situation. One of the most haunting documents in the collection was a partial letter written in Rebecca Lewis's handwriting, apparently after her capture. She wrote that she had learned, "This is not an isolated crime but an organized business that has been operating for several years." Rebecca mentioned hearing conversations about other women who were brought here under similar false pretenses, and noted that some have been here for months or longer, while others disappear to unknown destinations. Perhaps most tragically, Rebecca's letter expressed her realization that rescue was unlikely. She wrote that the men speak openly about the remote location being chosen specifically because territorial authorities never patrol this area, and that even if someone reported me missing, they would never find this place without knowing exactly where to look. The letter fragment ended abruptly, suggesting that Rebecca had been interrupted while writing or had hidden the incomplete letter when she heard someone approaching. The fact that the letter was found among Charles Evans' papers suggests that it may have been discovered and confiscated, though it's unclear whether Rebecca was punished for attempting to communicate with the outside world. Additional documents in the satchel provided more details about the criminal organization's structure and operations. A ledger, apparently maintained by Morrison, contained entries tracking asset acquisition dates, transport costs, client assignments, and revenue generation for what appeared to be a 2-year period from 1852 to 1853. Morrison's ledger listed 37 individual entries during this period, each identified by initials and basic descriptive information. Entry number 34, dated February 22, 1853, listed RL Trading Post, Brunette, good condition, premium placement, with notations about transport and final disposition. This entry almost certainly refers to Rebecca Lewis. The ledger also revealed the geographic scope of the operation. Acquisition locations included trading posts, settlements, and way stations throughout the Colorado Territory and extending into Kansas Territory and Nebraska Territory. The organization appeared to have contacts and operatives working along major travel routes, identifying and reporting potential victims to Evans and other procurement specialists. Final destinations listed in the ledger were coded with abbreviations, but geographical clues suggested locations throughout the Colorado mountain regions. Some entries noted repeat client arrangements, while others indicated transfer to regional operations or long-term placement contracts. The clinical language used in the ledger reflected the operator's view of human trafficking as a business transaction. The financial records in Morrison's ledger painted a disturbing picture of the profitability of the operation. Individual transactions ranged from $50 to $200, enormous sums in 1853 when a laborer might earn $20 per month. The total revenue recorded in the ledger exceeded $4,000, suggesting that human trafficking was providing the operators with substantial income. The final document in the satchel was a letter from Morrison to Evans, dated April 20, 1853, discussing plans to suspend operations temporarily due to increased territorial patrol activity in the region. Morrison wrote that recent inquiries from Denver authorities had made it necessary to relocate the mountain operation and establish new procurement protocols. Morrison's April letter also mentioned that assets currently in inventory would be transferred to permanent placements with reliable long-term clients, and that the organization would maintain low visibility until conditions improve for resuming full operations. This letter suggests that territorial authorities may have begun investigating the disappearances, forcing the criminal organization to adapt their methods. The discovery of these documents in 1867 prompted a formal investigation by Jefferson County Sheriff Morton Bradley. Bradley's investigation file, discovered in the county courthouse basement in 1963, documents his efforts to locate the sites described in the letters and to determine the fate of Rebecca Lewis and other victims. Sheriff Bradley's investigation revealed that the mountain operation referenced in the letters had operated from a network of remote cabins and caves in the foothills north of Clear Creek. Bradley and a small posse located several abandoned sites that matched descriptions in Morrison's correspondence, including the remains of structures that had been deliberately destroyed or abandoned. At one site, approximately 25 miles north of the main Clear Creek mining district, Bradley's team discovered evidence of recent habitation, including improvised sleeping quarters, cooking areas, and what appeared to be barriers or restraining devices constructed from logs and rope. Bradley's report noted that the site's remote location and defensible position would have made it ideal for the criminal operation described in the letters. Bradley's investigation also uncovered testimony from prospectors and trappers who recalled seeing unusual activity in the remote mountain areas during 1853 and 1854. Several witnesses reported observing small groups moving through the wilderness at odd times and women who appeared to be traveling under guard or restraint. One particularly significant witness was mountain man Jonathan Pike, who told Sheriff Bradley that he had observed a group matching the descriptions from the letters in the spring of 1853. Pike reported seeing 3 or 4 men with several women at a remote camp, noting that the women seemed frightened and were not moving freely about the camp, as would be normal for willing travelers. Pike's testimony, recorded in Sheriff Bradley's investigation file, indicated that he had been suspicious enough to observe the group from a concealed position for several hours. He reported that the women were kept in a single area under apparent guard, and that their demeanor and behavior suggested they were being held against their will. Pike said he had considered intervening, but decided against it due to being outnumbered and uncertain about the legal authority to take action. Despite the compelling evidence contained in the letters and the corroborating testimony gathered during his investigation, Sheriff Bradley was unable to locate Charles Evans, William Morrison, or any other individuals involved in the criminal organization. The suspects appeared to have disappeared as completely as their victims. Bradley's final report, dated September 30th, 1867, concluded that sufficient evidence exists to confirm that an organized criminal enterprise engaged in human trafficking operated in this region during 1853 and 1854. However, Bradley noted that the passage of time and the transient nature of the frontier population made it unlikely that justice could be achieved through the legal system. The sheriff's report also addressed the fate of Rebecca Lewis specifically. While Bradley found no direct evidence of what happened to her after her transport to the mountain operation, he concluded that Miss Lewis was almost certainly a victim of the criminal enterprise described in the recovered correspondence, and that, given the nature of the operation and the remote location, survival would have been highly unlikely. Bradley's investigation did reveal the ultimate fate of the criminal organization itself. Evidence suggested that territorial authorities had indeed begun investigating the suspicious disappearances by late 1853, forcing Evans and Morrison to abandon their Colorado operations. Whether they relocated to other territories or ceased their criminal activities entirely remained unknown. The case of Rebecca Lewis and the human trafficking ring that claimed her became one of the earliest documented examples of organized crime in the Colorado Territory. However, due to the sensitive nature of the crimes and the lack of surviving perpetrators to prosecute, territorial authorities chose to classify the investigation files rather than publicize the details. For over a century, the story remained buried in official archives and forgotten by history. Rebecca Lewis was remembered, if at all, as simply another person who disappeared into the vast wilderness of the frontier. The systematic nature of the crimes and the organized network of criminals who preyed on vulnerable women remained hidden. The rediscovery of the case in the 1960s sparked renewed interest in the darker aspects of frontier history. Historians began to recognize that the lawlessness of the frontier had enabled not just opportunistic crimes, but sophisticated criminal organizations that operated with near impunity across vast territories. Rebecca Lewis's story also highlighted the particular vulnerability of women on the frontier. While the promise of opportunity and freedom drew many women to the Western territories, the lack of legal protection and social support systems made them easy targets for those who would exploit their desperation and hope for better circumstances. The careful planning and systematic approach revealed in the recovered letters demonstrated that the criminals who victimized Rebecca Lewis were not mere opportunists, but experienced predators who understood exactly how to identify, isolate, and exploit vulnerable women. Their success in operating undetected for an extended period reflected the challenges faced by frontier law enforcement and the limitations of territorial authority in remote regions. In 1968, the Jefferson County Historical Society published a brief account of the case in their annual bulletin, marking the first time Rebecca Lewis's story had been made public. However, even this account was heavily sanitized, focusing primarily on the historical significance of the criminal organization rather than the specific details of the crimes against Rebecca and other victims. The Historical Society's account noted that the case provides insight into the challenges of maintaining law and order during the early territorial period and represented an early example of criminal organizations adapting their methods to exploit the unique conditions of frontier society. However, the account provided little detail about the human cost of these crimes or the individual stories of the victims. Today, Rebecca Lewis is remembered primarily through the documents that accidentally preserved her story. The leather satchel discovered by David Thornton in 1867 remains in the collection of the Colorado State Historical Society, serving as a reminder of the countless individuals whose stories were lost to the vastness and violence of the frontier. The site where Rebecca spent her final weeks remains lost to history. Despite Sheriff Bradley's investigation and subsequent efforts by historians and researchers, the exact location of the mountain operation has never been definitively identified. The remote mountain terrain that made the criminal operation possible also ensured that its physical traces would eventually disappear. What endures is the knowledge that Rebecca Lewis traveled west with hope for a better future, only to fall victim to men who saw her not as a human being, but as a commodity to be bought and sold. Her story serves as a reminder that the frontier, for all its promise of freedom and opportunity, harbored dangers that the law was powerless to prevent and justice was often unable to address. The case also raises questions about how many similar stories remain hidden in the forgotten corners of frontier history. If a single accidental discovery could reveal such a sophisticated criminal operation, how many other victims disappeared without leaving any trace? How many other predators operated with similar impunity in the vast, lawless territories of the American West? Rebecca Lewis's final letter fragment, with its increasingly desperate handwriting and abrupt ending, provides a haunting glimpse into the reality experienced by countless women who sought better lives on the frontier only to find themselves trapped in situations beyond their worst fears. Her words serve as testimony not only to her own suffering, but to the vulnerability of all who ventured into territories where human predators could operate without restraint. The mountains of Colorado, which promised gold and freedom to so many, became for Rebecca Lewis and others like her a prison from which there was no escape. Their stories remind us that progress and opportunity often came at a terrible human cost, particularly for those who had the least power to protect themselves. Years later, when the mining camps had given way to settled communities and territorial law had been replaced by state authority, the remote locations where these crimes occurred became hiking trails and scenic overlooks. Visitors who enjoy the natural beauty of the Colorado mountains today walk unknowingly over ground that once witnessed some of the darkest chapters in the territory's history. The silence that surrounds these forgotten crimes is perhaps the most haunting aspect of Rebecca Lewis's story. In a time when women had few rights and even fewer protections, their disappearance could be easily explained away or simply ignored. The vast wilderness that attracted so many seekers of fortune also provided the perfect cover for those who preyed upon human desperation. Rebecca Lewis left Missouri seeking independence and opportunity in the Colorado Territory. Instead, she found men who saw her vulnerability as an asset to be exploited and her isolation as an opportunity to be seized. Her story stands as a reminder that the American frontier, for all its mythological status as a land of freedom and possibility, was also a place where the most fundamental human rights could be violated with impunity. The documents that preserved her story also reveal the chilling efficiency with which criminal organizations adapted to frontier conditions. The careful planning, systematic approach, and professional coordination evident in the recovered correspondence demonstrate that even in the supposed lawlessness of the frontier, some individuals were capable of creating highly organized criminal enterprises that operated across vast territories. In the end, Rebecca Lewis became a statistic in a ledger maintained by men who viewed human trafficking as a business venture. Her individual humanity, her hopes and fears, her intelligence and dignity were reduced to abbreviations and coded entries that reflected only her value as a commodity in an illegal marketplace. The fact that her story survived at all is due entirely to accident, the chance discovery of hidden documents that the criminals failed to destroy before abandoning their Colorado operations. Without this accidental preservation, Rebecca Lewis would have remained forever among the countless individuals who simply vanished into the frontier, their fates unknown and their stories untold. Her memory serves as a testament to all those who sought better lives in the American West, but found instead exploitation, violence, and death. Their individual stories may be lost to history, but their collective experience reminds us that the cost of frontier expansion was paid not only by those who chose to take risks, but also by those who were victimized by others who saw the frontier's lawlessness as an opportunity for profit through human suffering. The Colorado mountains still keep their secrets. Somewhere in the remote wilderness north of Clear Creek, the scattered remains of Rebecca Lewis may still rest in an unmarked grave, known only to the wind and the silence of the peaks. Her story, preserved against all odds in a leather satchel hidden beneath the floorboards of a forgotten cabin, serves as the only monument she will ever have. And in the end, perhaps that is enough. That her name is remembered, her fate is known, and her suffering has not been entirely lost to the indifference of history. Rebecca Lewis sought gold in Colorado Territory and found only betrayal and death, but her story has achieved a different kind of permanence, serving as witness to both the promise and the peril of the American frontier experience. The silence that consumed her life has been broken, if only temporarily, by the discovery of documents that preserved her voice across more than a century. In reading her words and learning her story, we ensure that Rebecca Lewis is not entirely forgotten, that her humanity is acknowledged, and that her fate serves as a warning about the capacity for evil that can flourish in places where law cannot reach and where human dignity has no protection. Today, The Colorado State Historical Society maintains the recovered documents as part of their frontier crime archives. The leather satchel and its contents are preserved in climate-controlled storage, accessible only to researchers who seek to understand the darker aspects of territorial history. The collection serves as one of the few documented examples of organized criminal activity in the pre-statehood period. In 1969, historian Margaret Phillips completed the most comprehensive study of the case for her doctoral dissertation at the University of Colorado. Phillips' research, which remained unpublished due to its disturbing content, estimated that the criminal organization documented in the recovered letters may have been responsible for the disappearances of as many as 50 women across multiple territories between 1851 and 1854. Phillips' work also revealed that similar operations likely existed throughout the frontier regions, taking advantage of the same lawless conditions and vulnerable populations that enabled Evans and Morrison's Colorado enterprise. Her research suggested that Rebecca Lewis's story, rather than being an isolated incident, represented a systematic pattern of exploitation that operated across the American West during the territorial period. The trading post where Rebecca Lewis first encountered Charles Evans was demolished in 1871 to make way for railroad construction. No marker commemorates the location where she made the decision that would cost her life. The South Platte River continues to flow past the site, carrying away the last physical traces of the place where her hopes for a better future were exploited by those who saw her only as merchandise. McKinney's Trading Post ledger, with its final entry documenting Rebecca's departure, remains the last official record of her as a free person. The careful handwriting of proprietor James McKinney, noting her excitement about the supposed mining opportunity, serves as an inadvertent memorial to her optimism and determination, qualities that made her both admirable and vulnerable in the harsh frontier environment. The mountain trails where Rebecca Lewis spent her final weeks have long since been reclaimed by nature. Hikers and tourists who explore the wilderness areas north of Clear Creek today pass unknowingly through terrain that once witnessed systematic human trafficking and exploitation. The natural beauty of the landscape belies the dark history hidden beneath its surface. In 1893, as Colorado celebrated its statehood and the frontier period passed into memory, a brief newspaper article in the Denver Post mentioned the discovery of historical documents relating to criminal activity during the territorial period. The article, buried on page 7 between advertisements and local business announcements, provided no details about the crimes or the victims, reflecting society's continued reluctance to confront the darker aspects of frontier history. Sheriff Morton Bradley, who conducted the 1867 investigation, never forgot the case that revealed the systematic exploitation of vulnerable women on the frontier. In his memoir, published privately in 1885, Bradley wrote that the Rebecca Lewis case had taught him that evil does not require supernatural powers or mysterious circumstances. It requires only the absence of law and the presence of those willing to exploit human desperation. Bradley's memoir, discovered in his family's papers in 1971, provides the most personal account of how the case affected those who investigated it. He wrote that learning the details of Rebecca's fate had shattered any romantic notions about frontier justice and revealed that the lawlessness we celebrated as freedom came at a cost paid primarily by those least able to protect themselves. The last known reference to Rebecca Lewis in official documents appears in an 1875 territorial report on unsolved crimes. The brief entry lists her as missing, presumed deceased, and notes that investigation concluded with insufficient evidence for prosecution. The clinical language provides no hint of the systematic exploitation that claimed her life or the broader criminal enterprise that operated with impunity across the frontier. As the 19th century drew to a close and Colorado transitioned from frontier territory to settled state, the story of Rebecca Lewis and countless others like her faded into historical obscurity. The rapid pace of development and settlement left little time for reflection on the human cost of frontier expansion, particularly when that cost was paid primarily by women whose voices were easily silenced and whose disappearances could be easily explained away. Today, Rebecca Lewis exists primarily as a cautionary footnote in specialized academic studies of frontier crime. Her individual humanity, her intelligence, determination, and hope for a better future has been overshadowed by the historical significance of the criminal organization that victimized her. Yet it is precisely her individual story that provides the most powerful testimony to the vulnerability of those who sought opportunity on the American frontier. The mountains of Colorado continue to draw visitors seeking adventure, opportunity, and escape from conventional life. Many come seeking the same things that drew Rebecca Lewis to the territory in 1852: independence, possibility, and the chance for a fresh start. Few realize that these same mountains once concealed systematic exploitation of people who shared their hopes and dreams. In the end, Rebecca Lewis achieved a form of immortality she never sought and could never have imagined. Her story, preserved by accident and revealed by chance, serves as testimony to all those whose frontier dreams ended in exploitation and death. The documents that survived her by more than a century ensure that her voice, however faint and however late, is finally heard. The leather satchel that preserved her story now rests in an archive, protected from time and decay, holding within it the proof that Rebecca Lewis lived, hoped, trusted, and suffered. It stands as perhaps the only monument she will ever have, a collection of letters and documents that bear witness to both human evil and human endurance. Her name, once known only to family and friends, now serves as a symbol for all those who were victimized by the criminal enterprises that flourished in the lawless territories of the American West. Rebecca Lewis sought gold in Colorado Territory and found only betrayal, but her story has achieved a different kind of permanence, ensuring that the price paid by frontier victims is neither forgotten nor ignored. The silence that once protected her killers has finally been broken. The wilderness that once concealed their crimes has yielded up its secrets. And the voice of Rebecca Lewis, preserved against all odds in fading ink on yellowed paper, continues to speak across the centuries, reminding us that behind every historical statistic lies a human story deserving of remembrance and respect.